Congressman, welcome back to the program. The Vice President, Secretary of Defense, Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, all of them accompanied you on a trip to the border the other day. Tell us what the whole point of this was for, and do you think that that visit and the new administration's visit down there is really going to change anything at the border after what the president's already done?
Yeah, Jason, thank you for having me. I'm absolutely grateful for the new policy changes that President Trump has led. And I'm grateful that the vice president came down. I had the opportunity to fly on Air Force Two with him, and he didn't come alone, right? He brought the Secretary of Defense, Hegseth, and he brought the Director of National Intelligence, Gabbard, and which I thought was very important because, in my eyes, this is all of the above, whole of government approach. We all need to be paddling in the same direction. My district, as you know, has been at the epicenter of it. Texas has been impacted by this. So to have so many folks come down and visit, high level visit like that, I think sends a very clear message to the world that things have changed in the United States.
But what's going to change, do you think, if anything, besides what the president's already done, sending active duty troops, all across the southern border?
A lot has already changed just overnight, and we've seen this with previous administrations too. We saw this with Obama's administration, Trump's first administration, Clinton, Bush. Anytime you surge resources to the border and you make it a priority, you don't just talk about it, you actually do it. It immediately has an impact. You've seen the numbers come down, which is a great thing. But honestly, the state of Texas has been hammered by this crisis for so long. It's going to take years, not weeks, in order for us to get whole again. And so I was grateful that the vice president came down, but there's a lot of work ahead of us. And I'd also say this too, Congress has a role to play in this as well. We can't just be taking credit for all the things the administration is doing or throwing rocks at the previous administration. We have a role to play in this as well. Part of that is making sure that the administration has the funding it needs to be successful and the policy it needs for these long-term gains to hold.
Well, let's talk about that for a moment, because the president said the other night that, everyone had been talking about, Democrats especially, have been talking about the need for new legislation, comprehensive reform to immigration. And the president said, all we really needed at the end, he said, is a new president. What was your reaction to that?
I think he was spot on. And I came to that conclusion probably about 2 years ago. I worked really close with the last administration to try to get them off dead center, and they wouldn't budge. And so eventually it came to the point where it was just going to need a new administration. Now, I do say that's short term, right? The administration's 8 years in many cases. Congress needs to make this long term. We need to all agree that we all need to be safe, regardless of where you are, whether you're in Texas or anywhere else, a small community or a large community. We all need to be safe. Our mayors, our judges, our elected officials, our members of Congress, the president, we all need to come together and make sure we're safe. At the same time, we need to protect those that are doing it the right way. Those coming over illegally, those looking for work, doing via work visas. You can separate the two. I think it's very important that we separate the two. We go all in on the bad actors, and we go all in on those that want to come and live the American dream.
Considering your extensive military background, are you comfortable having active duty U.S. soldiers deployed to the southern border?
I am. And that was one of the conversations I had with the Secretary of Defense was, hey, what's the long-term plan here, right? I get the initial surge, the shock and awe, if you will, and the whole things have changed. But what's the long-term plan? And one of the things he mentioned to me was, he goes, Tony, this is only phase one of 4 phases. So that tells me that there is a long-term plan to sustain this projection that our border is closed from bad actors. And so
what are the other 4 phases? No, I'm sorry, Congressman. What are the other 4 phases?
Essentially, you have an initial flux of people, right, which is happening right now. They're about to surge an entire division, 10,000 people to the border in different forms of fashion. A lot of those expertise are in security and engineering. As I'm talking to folks on Fort Bliss and on Laughlin, some of the military bases along the border that are helping this. The other phases will come I think as needed, if you will, or not as needed, but they will be shaped depending on what happens next, right? If the numbers stay low, if there's progress, I think you'll see this. But this is a long-term sustained operation. It's not just hey, we're packing it up the end of the month and patting ourselves on the back. I think you're going to see this is the new norm.
And when people hear this, I mean, the first thing I think of is, geez, you're staging the military on the border. Clearly, you're not going south of the border, but is the border still going to be open to the all important trade that we have with Mexico?
It is, and it has been, but this is once again a couple weeks ago. I went to El Paso, but I also spent the day in Juarez, and I went and I visited with Mexican officials. I
Yeah.
visited with the mayor of Juarez. I visited the consulate there. I visited with law enforcement officers, law enforcement officials, and I was very clear to them: this can't be the U.S. versus Mexico because this will not go well for Mexico, but it won't go well for us either. Especially here in Texas, Mexico is our number one trading partner. This needs to be a partnership. How does the United States and Mexico come together and say, how do we keep us safe? How do we make sure trade is prosperous? How do we do these things as a partnership? Not it's your fault, my fault. It's how do we come together and solve these things? A lot of that, though, in my eyes, is dialogue. And members of Congress have to do their part. It can't just be the administration pulling all the weight. That's why I thought it was very important for me and to go to Mexico, and I think it's important for others to do as well.
Let's talk about tariffs for a moment there. President Trump said he has implemented a 30-day pause on tariffs between Canada and Mexico. And there, we've heard from mayors across the state. We've heard from CEOs who say, listen, this is going to negatively impact our business. It's going to negatively impact Texas consumers. Well, what's your response? And what do you tell those CEOs in Texas and those mayors across Texas?
Well, I think what the mayors and the CEOs are seeing is President Trump's position of even the threat of tariffs is working. I mean, you've seen these countries, Venezuela, Mexico, Canada, you name it. You've seen these countries. EU is going to be next in the hopper. You've seen these countries essentially say, "Hey, how do we how do we fix this?" And so if that is working, guess what? The president is going to continue to use that instrument, if not use it even more. So this is where I think it's very important that the world understand there is a new administration and then there is a new deck, if you will. And the sooner we can come together and figure these things out together, the better everyone will be. Long term, though, I mean, historically, tariffs have proven that they're very difficult to get right, and you can hurt a lot of different things if you get them wrong. And so I think right now you're seeing the president use that instrument to bring people to the negotiating table, and it's working.
But it's also working at the expense of the stock market and my 401k and your 401k too. I mean, what's the end game here, do you think? Because it's the stocks, all week have been driven down by the threat of tariffs. And a lot of people would say, listen, things were pretty cheap as is. I could go to, the grocery store and buy an avocado at a decent price. I don't want to pay double or triple that now.
Yeah, I think there will be some volatility, and that's unfortunate. I don't want to see that either. I want us to all be stable. But I was very clear to Mexico every time I've sat down with their leadership. Mexico has taken advantage of us for years. I mean, I remember visiting, and they're going, "No, the border's secure. Everything's perfectly fine." I'm going, "You can sell that to someone in West Virginia. You can't sell that to me. I live along the border. I can give you a
Yeah.
hundred examples of where things aren't going great." And so they got to get out of that, fantasy land, and they got to come to the table with how do we fix, how do we come together? I think they're starting to realize that. I'm also starting to see more and more companies want to build in America, which I think is a beautiful thing. And so I think it's going to be change is always difficult. I think the beginning stage of some of these things has people nervous. You're certainly seeing that in the stock market and other areas. But long term, I think this is what we need, a shock to the system, if you will, so that way our taxpayer dollars don't get wasted on these ridiculous items. They get put towards us.
President Trump is said to be getting an executive order ready to eliminate the Department of Education. Republicans have been trying to do this for decades, as you know as well. My question, though, is can the president do that with an executive order and not by going through Congress at all? Isn't this a congressional decision to make?
He's certainly going to do his part, and he is not going to wait on Congress. And you know what? I don't blame him, because if you wait on Congress to do anything, you're going to be waiting a very long time, right? And so I think he's plugging away. I do think Congress has a role to play in here. We need to figure out. I'm of the mindset the power needs to get down to the local level, right? It needs to get down to the states, needs to get down to the municipalities. Who knows better for the education for your own children
Sure.
than you? And I also am of the mindset that there are federal programs that work. Trio works, Pell Grants work. So I have questions. What are some of these federal programs that I think are beneficial? These aren't wasted taxpayer dollars. They are beneficial. Where does that fall into the equation? What happens to those programs that I think, have been successful for so many Americans for so long? I think that's what we have to protect, and all the other stuff we push it down to the states.
I can remember back in 2008 for President Obama, 2016 or 2020 rather for President Biden, they would both issue a flurry of executive orders like we're seeing now. And the Republicans in charge of Congress would always say, listen, you can't legislate through executive orders. That's our job. What do you say to so many people who say that, listen, Congress is ceding authority to the president right here and not doing its job?
Yeah, Jason. I mean, the frustration I have is I'm in year 5 of being in Congress now. And I tell you what, Congress will punt on first down if you give them the opportunity. And they will say it's somebody else's fault but their own, right? And that is very frustrating. It's frustrating to me. It's frustrating to a lot of Americans. I would love for Congress, an equal branch of government, just like our founding fathers meant it to be strong, to go in there and say, no, we want that we align on these agenda items that the American public have voted us in on. But the reality is, right now, Congress is as weak as can be. So if the president is going to make some of these changes that are keeping us safe and putting us in the right direction, I'm all about it.
But why is Congress so weak then? I mean, Republicans control both houses in Congress. You have the White House. There's a majority of the Supreme Court. From the outside, the Beltway here, it looks like Congress, the Republican Congress, is ceding its authority to the executive branch and saying, go crazy, executive branch, do what you want.
Well, it's not just Republicans. Democrats, when they had all 3 levers, it was the same deal. I mean, it's just the body is just been bent for so long that all it knows how to do is bend. And I get that. I totally get working with and delivering on an agenda. But once again, I would like to see a Congress that is independent, that is fighting for us. We're the closest to the people. We should be the voice that goes, hey, look, I agree with a lot of the waste, fraud, and I agree with cutting a lot of a smaller government, but determining what that small government looks like, not just giving all our power away for somebody else to decide.
Last thing I want to ask you about is the presidential address to Congress. We saw the political theatrics from the Democrats. The opposition party always, tries to be heard, regardless of who's in power. But your colleague Al Green, the Democrat from Houston, was censured on Thursday for interrupting the president's speech on Tuesday night. The same was not done for Marjorie Taylor Greene, the congresswoman from Georgia. Do you think that was a mistake by not censoring her?
No, I think the whole censoring thing, I don't even know what that means. I mean, I don't even know what happens. It's almost like it's not even a slap on the wrist. It's less than that. It was unfortunate to see Mr. Green, Al Green, get up there and feel as if that's what he had to do to push back. And I'd like to get back to a point where Congress has a little more decorum, and we come together and we have debate and we have dialogue, and it's lively, but it's respectful. It feels as if those times in politics are behind us, but I think it's so important that we get members, we get people in politics that are willing to have these debates in a constructive way. As far as the whole censoring deal, I don't even know what that means.
Probably a badge of honor for whoever gets it, I guess, these days, regardless of party. This is the last thing. I didn't ask one of the most important questions here. Congress is closing in on a funding deadline to make sure it funds the government before March 14th. You're a no vote so far, is what I understand, not voting to pass the current agreement, if you can even say that. Tell us why you are against this. This is a Republican idea.
Yeah, I hate CRs. I hate continuing resolutions. I think they're absolutely terrible. I think Congress's job is to pass a budget. 12 bills should be passed. Republicans control the House. We control the Senate. There should be conservative appropriation bills that get passed. I also understand, it's a lot of work, and you're talking about a body that doesn't like to do a lot of work, right? And so, and I understand that the administration is just getting going, like they're really getting going. Now's not the time for a government shutdown. Shutdowns can be very difficult, especially for a new administration that has a lot of changes to make. But I just want the system to work. I want the appropriations process it was meant to come before Congress and determine what's the junk, what needs to be protected, what's the kidneys and the hearts, or the heart, what needs to be protected, what needs to grow, and that's the appropriations committee's job. And it seems as if we have ceded all that power to Doge, which I love. They're doing a great job finding all this stuff. That's our job. How about let's get back to work and let's pass a conservative budget?
At the end of the day, do you think we're going to see a government shutdown, though?
It's hard to tell. I would say I don't think so. I think at the end of the day, we probably get to a point, that keeps us going. It's just very frustrating in Washington to go week after week that basically people just give up. Oh, and they don't want to do the hard work. They don't want to come together and make the tough
Mm.
decisions. They just want to go, hey, look, let's just write off this year and get going on next year, as if next year is going to be any easier than this year. So it's a little frustrating on my end, but I don't think we go down the government shutdown route.
Congressman, always good to see you. Thank you for the time.
Thanks, Jason.